They're like matched in color as well.
I actually, that's exactly what I was going for. I was like, what would Tom wear? Let me resonate with him. And the fact that it actually worked is actually, I was like, I mean, I knew that was going to happen, but I also am like, holy shit, that actually worked. Cool, man. Well, welcome to the Pat Life Podcast. I'm Patrick, and we are here again with Tom Barnett. It's been an honor to have him not just once, but twice. But we want to go deeper into some things that we were talking about the other day, but focusing now more specifically on self in regards to the perception of self and also ultimately what the purpose is for self. What is your purpose? That's a big question. It's a loaded question, but I think at some point everybody asks that question. And if you don't have quite a nice understanding of how you perceive yourself, how you perceive your surrounding, it can be a very hard question to come about and really start to dig deep into. So I actually want to start, if you don't mind, Tom, telling everyone about your experiences that you said you had in regards to that. How did you say it? It was finding your purpose of sitting on the skate ramp was one of the times where you just kind of realized there was higher divine power of some sorts. Would you mind explaining those moments that you said you had?
Okay, well, those are the thing is, I'm not sure of what I experience is going to relate to others because, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why we actually get the signals that we get when we do. I think whether it's a code, like it's inbuilt and it's like at a certain time you're meant to get that code and it just happens, or whether it's a result of what you've been doing. So little things you've been doing to open up to get some kind of transmission or whatever. I'm not actually sure, but so for me, yeah, for me it's just it was more just that. Yeah, I don't know. I was just being struck by it. What were you going to ask?
Yeah, no. I was just saying because what was interesting is when you talked about it in the past and just how you've had those divine moments. It's for some people they might have it happen and not even realize there was something bigger happening in themselves. So I think it was just you just sitting, as you said, on a skate ramp. It was just it wasn't anything exaggerated where you were, saving someone's life from a burning building, and that's when you realized that it's the subtleties. Is I guess what I was more just seeing if you'd be interested in talking more about the subtlety of a moment where you were
Yeah,
like, oh,
sure. Yeah.
does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Actually, that's a good way to put it too, because that way some people can maybe recognize some subtleties that they'd missed. So,
That's what I
so
meant.
the first time, I guess, was when I was really little, like 2 or 3. I kind of noticed a few things, and just where it's just that moment where you just, I don't know, like even thinking about it, I lose words. It's just kind of it's a real subtle thing, but it's a real feeling. You're just starting to comprehend a lot more than just yourself.
Yeah.
And then when I was 11 or 12, I was on a school exchange and I was laying in bed and we just had complete paralysis. And I kind of left my body at that point and I just had this overwhelming sense of another higher being around me without being able to see it, but could feel it. And
Right.
I knew something was up. And it was, that was a big thing, I guess. But the time that you mentioned was when I was on the skateboard ramp around 16 years of age. And yeah, it was late afternoon and I was just seeing the light filtering through the trees. It was really golden. And at that point, I just kind of really, it was almost like it was carrying some information, it was speaking. And I had a real sense of calm and a real sense of reverence and awe for that. But it was nothing major. It wasn't like Northern Lights. It wasn't lightning ripping the sky apart. It was really subtle, just this golden glow coming through, which I'd seen many times before. But until that point, hadn't really picked up on just the subtlety of it and the power that was in that subtlety. So that was, I guess, the moment you're referring to. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I think just so I wasn't trying to speak for you, I do remember you saying it was the subtlety. And I think that's, as we dive deeper into days, talking to the people of understanding that there are going to be those wow moments, but then there's those subtle moments and just learning how to pay attention to those. Especially everyone's always looking for signs in life, whether or not you're looking from a divine place, but oh, is she going to give me a sign? Oh, like pay attention to the signs. And if you're so focused on these big signs, you lose that attention to those subtleties. And that's what I think, based off our last conversation and going into today, is paying attention to subtle moments in your life, understanding the powers that they have, and just what does it mean, being able to try to break it down of, wow, this is more beautiful than ever. And as you were saying, talking about light, the reason why I want to start here and kind of work our way, as I said, to the cell is
Yeah.
when you look at the spectrum, every time when people have had light death experience, they would say, I was going towards a light. I was going towards a light. Okay, well, when you look at also the molecular microscopic level, we are light. So you see there's this spectrum of light, and it's just paying attention to even your moment, just this subtle light coming in, and what is the importance of light, if that makes sense. So if you don't mind, when you talk about, let's just say, first and foremost, talking about colors and frequencies, what can you tell people about, different wavelengths and colors? Because this will lead into other stuff as well that you could talk
Okay.
about. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, well, light, as far as we know, is the greatest carrier of information. So it's literally coded with all kinds of information. Depending on the wavelength of light, depends on what code is essentially embedded in it. So to the point where if you imagine that a beam of light is shot straight at your forehead, say,
Mhm.
and then within that light, it works the same with sound. It could be embedded in a tone of sound, but it's carried information. It's like a zip file. So instead of you having to read reams of information, it's like all in there and it can be all encoded at once. It's a non-linear process of information. And that's why sunlight is so important, because it triggers what is embedded already in the coding of the RNA and DNA in our bodies and in all organisms. So it spurs things like growth, sprouting of seeds, things like that. That's all done by the information provided by light. So then what you're talking about, I guess, is going into the different wavelengths of light. So your different colors represent different wavelengths. Then you've got the unseen, like your ultraviolets, infrareds, and all those. They're all unseen to our eye, but they all carry information. Every part of radiation as well. You got gamma radiation and hang on, turn that off. So yeah, you've got a lot of information coming from all sources. So I guess what you brought up earlier was interesting, because for me, I never really go into the specifics of red light does this and blue light does this and green and white and whatever, because a lot of people then go, well, then, oh, I'm missing this light and I have to focus all on this. And it gets really reductionist in people's way of thinking, and compartmentalizes and gets a little extreme. Whereas light itself, for me anyway, I just think if it's natural, it's good. If it's unnatural, like even what I'm looking at here, a ring light,
Right.
I'm okay to do it for an hour or so for an interview. But other than that, I'm turning it off. I don't use it, because that's unnatural light and it has a detrimental effect on the body. But then right out there is the sun. So I'll go out after this and I'll get a bit of sunlight. So if it's natural, it tends to carry beneficial wavelengths and information. If it's unnatural, it tends to bring the non-beneficial kind. That's where I'll start with. If you want to go any deeper in anything.
Yeah, no, and as I said, talking about perception and purpose, think about how many people today, their perception of sunlight. And this is what I think is important, is kind of talking about these different pieces and then seeing, okay, well, what are these perceptions? Is you're talking about light carries information, it carries data, it's ingested from your pores, it's ingested through your eyes, and you're breathing in all of this, standing in grass or grounding, as you would say, you're taking in all of that energy, all that information, and at the same time, people are saying, oh, it's unsafe. It's like, how are we perceiving the world? And just people understanding, is you've said, hey, we're meant to be in that natural light. There's a purpose for it. But how we perceive it can totally throw off how we then see the world.
Yeah.
People who are, they'll have an umbrella to be outside, in the sun for, just to go across the street or something. And I always find that interesting, especially in the city. It's, you're like, what is it that you're afraid of? Is it afraid of, getting a sunburn? Is it that you've been told just your whole life, so that's just what how you perceive the world? So I think it's important for people to even see and hear the depth of, light has purpose more than just, lights things in the room. it carries this energy. Because as you start to get down into the cell, I would love to go into what makes up a cell, the importance of light frequency, what frequencies then we're taking into the body, how is it manifesting in the body, and then ultimately what is it doing to us at the molecular level, the cells. So if you don't mind, maybe we can start to veer into that. So like if you're taking in sun, what's happening at your cells? Would you mind maybe going into that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll start from where you were talking about, because it's interesting when you have a preconceived idea about what something is, despite the immense power and life-giving properties of the sun, for example. If your mind turns the sun, thinks the sun's an enemy, your body will turn what is a powerful agent into pretty much a poison, because of how much stress you're creating for your own body. And we all know that our minds have the ability to be self-destructive to our own bodies. So that's a really interesting point, is to get that mind out of the way in a lot of cases, because it can literally make something that's good, can make it a poison. So
Would you
it's
say that it would
actually
change
really,
the frequency? Would you say that it could even change the frequency of how
I
that?
think so.
Okay. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
That's what I would venture to say myself, and how I see it even in what I'm doing with my job is, you can have somebody being like, hey, this move, based off of what your goals are and what your limitations are, this move would be really good. But a preconceived notion of not just that move, but of self, can make that a very traumatic thing. And so you see it all the time, and you see how they approach that exercise or whatever the case is, with so much timidness or so much fear. And it's like that just ticking time bomb of something is going to negatively happen, and you're constantly having to reinforce the, hey, let's slowly go into this, let's take our time, let's not just change how you think of the move, but change the molecular level, the cells, like, hey, you're okay, we can do this. And I think what's interesting though is you see a lightness in people, truthfully a lightness, when people make that shift. And I think light is so important to perception, and so important to people understanding their purpose, at whatever scale that is. So yeah, if you don't mind though, maybe just going into parts of the cell, and how
Cool.
traumas, frequencies, all that can affect a cell.
Yep. So I guess we're also talking about a filter, because anything that comes to us is essentially, unless your mind is completely present and free, you're operating through a filter. So it's like putting, if you have light coming in and then you put like a sunglass or a UV filter, then what comes through is going to be different from just the pure light. And that's what our mind is like. It's a filter. It's like if you shine light through a prism, it fragments it, and then each part is different from what it was in its original source. So then that's kind of what we're doing with our mind. It is a filter or a prism, and it can fragment, what was the purity of the source.
Mhm.
So once it does come to the body, as far as the cells are concerned, they're in complete concert with every other cell in the body. Not only that, but the external environment. So we will our cells will behave in a way that reflects our mental, emotional, and spiritual state, but also the environment around us. So that's where epigenetics also comes in, is where our environmental factors turn on and off certain sequences within our coding based on what it is that we need to engage in and how we can survive and thrive and things like that. So from a fundamental perspective from the cell, it is a little bit of a mistake to kind of try to isolate a cell and then the mitochondria and then the RNA and then like whatever else is in there, because they don't operate on their own. They have a huge bearing, or what is around them has a huge bearing on each cell. But what's really important or interesting about the cell is the replication. So we grow a whole new body about every 7 years, but different parts of the body, they replicate sooner than that, whether it's monthly, yearly, or, overall it takes 7 years to grow a kind of a whole new body, but each part is replicating itself, sooner than that. And what's interesting about that is that the way they replicate and the health of the way they replicate is determined primarily by what's coming into our body. And what comes into our body is our food and our water, our thoughts, but also the light that we're exposed to. So if we don't get adequate light, that's going to affect the way each cell functions and the way each cell replicates. So it's continually storing. I guess what's also interesting is how cells store memory. So embedded in the cell is a memory, not only of itself and its function, but of the past, the present, and the future in relation to how it's going to function like right now.
Yeah,
And that's got a lot to do with what's in our unconscious mind. That's got a lot to do with what we're exposed to, as I said, with regards to light and environmental factors, and also just those epigenetic factors, which can come back to our lineage, and what's stored from our ancestors are actually stored in our cells today. That's where trauma can still be embedded. And from like a physiological scientific perspective, you'll go, well, if I look into a light microscope, where do I see trauma in a cell? I only see a membrane. I only see, different this, that, and the other. You don't see it so much, but it's there. It's a metaphysical imprint. But that metaphysical imprint then becomes physical when a cell might start showing, it might start, what's the word? It's not representing itself, but it's whatever it is where it's showing the physical symptom. It starts to demonstrate that. So it can have a weakness in the cell. It can have a deformity, or it can become cancerous. It can have overgrowth. It can have mutations.
yeah,
And that is the physical representative of that metaphysical storage of memory within the cell.
yeah.
So you would have seen it because I can tell that you kind of already know this stuff already. So when you've seen it in, for example, in a client maybe, or in yourself, like can you think of like an actual example of where you've seen that the cells have a great complexity more than just identifying individual parts of what's in a cell in
Absolutely.
relation to the whole?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I had a client who he was telling me he had a knee injury. He tore his ACL, was a soccer player. When he was younger, after that injury, his life, was a lot harder. He had a lot of depression because he couldn't play anymore. Just kind of had a lot of these tolls on his body, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And so what was interesting is I put him into as I told you last time, that lunge position. And he was fine at a certain point, but once he started hitting a certain angle, you saw his entire body tense up. His neck started tensing up. His back foot was shaking. He was turning it, trying to get more stability. And I was just watching his knee because I knew that was the knee. And you can just see it, his leg going like this. It would look like a Richter scale type thing. And I was like, are you in pain? He goes, no. Like, just like that. He's like, no. But everything was tensed up. So I was like, all right, stop. And I was like, are you in pain or anything? He's like, no, man, I'm actually fine. And I was like, why was your body responding that way? And he's like, which way? Had no recollection, like conscious recollection of what was literally right in front of him. And so as we were talking about it, I go, what would have happened if you went a little bit deeper? And he goes, oh, I couldn't go deeper. And what it was fascinating is, as we came to realize, it was his body, that memory in the knee was exactly that point. We found that point where the memory of whatever trauma happened all those years ago was literally brought to the surface. And so for me, it was such a fascinating revelation of when you see people, they seem calm in the sense of like, oh yeah, I could do all these squats, I could do these jumps, all of this, that, and you start to see all of these, them basically kind of hijacking the move to make it look like they're doing something. Like, all right, slow down. That's not even close to what we were supposed to do. You see, though, their mind, they're doing that to get through it, but they're more often not just trying to protect a trauma. They're protecting themselves, but still trying to complete whatever it is that you're asking, or whatever the classes they're taking. And so that, for me, I was paying more attention to those with different clients, and you start to see it happens more and more. Is that their physical limitation isn't there. It's not that it's a physical limitation. It's a traumatic limitation that's from a past. Like, their knee can go through that range, or they can do the pull up and their shoulder's fine, but there's that trauma that lives in that shoulder. And it's like basically talking to them, being like, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. You remember what happened last time? And it could have been 40, 20, whatever years ago. And so for me, it was a revelation of seeing that more and being able to witness and then learning how to navigate through that with people. I don't know if you had any of that with your clients.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've always seen that. I mean, some of it's caused by an instability that hasn't been addressed. Like if there's something in that system that hasn't been addressed, that'll send those signals that it's like it's not safe to do. But it's definitely, there is that memory there, and it's stored. That trauma is stored, and it comes out, and it comes out in shakes. Actually, shaking is one of those things that's really beneficial. If people can find a point in an exercise or a movement where they're like shaking, it's good to actually stay there,
Oh
because
yeah.
that getting that out, it's
Well,
pretty cool.
one thing that I like to ask them, I don't know if you do this, is I go, what was going through your mind during that shaking? And they're like, oh, I was calm. But it's like, if I asked you to go deeper, what was going through your mind, or the thought of going deeper? And it was like, oh, I don't want to get hurt again, or I don't want to tear my ACL again. So you see that through the shaking, not so much the physical, but the mental, you go like, what's going through your mind through that? Because you could have been like, oh, when I was 5, or oh, is this like how it will bring those memories right to the forefront in such a way that is so prominent that they're like, I have to address this. I have to address it. And that's what I think the power of putting people in some sort of stressful situation safely, of course, can bring at the cellular level, the structures, whatever, deformities there or whatever strengths are there, we bring that and we can recognize it in that moment. And as you said, there's a system, right? So it could be the knee that we're paying attention to, but there's something going on that they might have hurt their left shoulder years ago, and it's just that system that it hasn't been addressed. But one thing I do want to go more into in regards to the cell is, are you familiar with the Gerson method by any chance?
Gerson?
Yeah.
Which part? I mean, I'm familiar with Gerson therapy.
Yeah. So just talking more in depth about his not his direct interaction, but with Dr. Ning Ling, and then Dr. Freeman W. Cope and all that, talking about the sodium pump.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Would you mind maybe going into how they had an alternative? Do you know about their alternative notion of what was really going on with the sodium pump?
No. Do you want to
Yeah,
fill me in on that?
Yeah. So you obviously salt on the outside, and then in the serum, and then inside you have the potassium. And they were saying, oh, this pump using ATP is pushing potassium against the gradient into the serum. And when you're seeing people with swollen cells, whether it's cancer, tuberculosis, or just trauma of any kind, this Dr. Gilbert Ning Ling and some other doctors as well were able to show that that's actually, through their hypothesis, goes against the conservation of energy, the law of conservation of energy. Yet it's still being talked about and it's still being pushed, and there isn't real proof to necessarily show that. And so they were talking about their own hypothesis of it's called the association induction. And essentially what it's talking about, we were talking about frequencies and going into structured water, is that the cell has more of a honeycomb shape. And what's ultimately happening is the passing of these potassium and sodium is a lot more because of the structured water that goes through these honeycomb shapes, because they actually basically not nuked, but they depleted a cell of its ATP and all these functions, and they still had it functioning, and it was still passing through. The potassium was staying in the cell and the sodium was out. And they're saying, well, if we basically debilitated the sodium pump, how is this still happening? So what was interesting though is and a lot of people today dealing with physical traumas, emotional traumas, and not understanding at the cellular level, this is the stuff that is happening. As you've talked before about too much water, you're swelling up cells, you're creating a more salt environment within the cell, which is leading to more issues. And would you mind maybe talking more about on that end about water and too much water retention and things like that and the detriments it can do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I hadn't actually heard that theory about the honeycomb structure, but it makes a lot of sense, because there are a lot of, I'll get back to it, but just as an aside, there's people say that if you've got something wrong with the thyroid, then you got to take meds and whatever. But the thing is that there's always some mechanism in the body to take up the slack. So if the thyroid's not working properly, the parathyroids take over, or the adrenals provide. It's like there's so many things that can happen outside of what science says this does this and this channel does that. But like you just said, there's so many experiments where people have proven that if that function isn't there, then there's some other function that actually provides it. So is it so set in stone that that's the way it works? We'll go, it might be cool to go into some of the structure of the cell a bit later anyway and talk about how different frequencies affect those. We'll do that.
Love that.
But as far as water, yeah, what happens is water itself, like pure water doesn't get into the cells. They have to get it has to get transported to the cells. So to do that, it needs an ionic charge. And so an ionic charge means it has to be bound by something. So generally a mineral of some kind. So sodium and potassium are minerals, and that's what can bind to the water molecules to help carry them in and out. And depending on the charge that's inside or outside, that's generally because I just guess I don't want to get too far ahead of where anybody might be listening, but the cells open up from time to time. They have channels that open and close. And so that's generally signaled by a charge, positive and negative ions just being an electrical unit or charge. So then that's how a cell is signaled to either push stuff out or let stuff in.
Mm-hmm.
So waste out and generally, good stuff in. That's generally, but then you get malfunctions and then you get things happen and you can get like swollen cells and all that kind of stuff because there is a disruption in the communication pathway. And that's pretty much what those channels are. The sodium, the potassium, anything that ionic, it's like it's really like a chemical signal, like a messenger, and it's a communication system. And when that communication system it's like if you say you want some water and I've just got a hose and you're like, yeah, give me a bit more. And you go, that's enough. And I'll turn it off. But if that communication thing, I was like filling you up full of water and you're like, what? You're drowning and dying. It's because the communication is not there. And so there's a lot of ways the communication can be cut off. And one of those ways, funnily enough, is by the way light and frequency operates throughout and within the body. And that's one of the ways that communication channel can be disrupted or diverted. So it's getting a completely different signal than what it's supposed to get. One of the worst things somebody can do is to put in too much plain water to their body. That is going to confuse it, and it has to do a lot of work to regulate and create and maintain homeostasis. So generally that thins the blood and it washes out minerals, and the minerals are what's needed to provide those proper messages to the cells to regulate that balance. So it's kind of just a really stressful thing to do to the body because it'll do it. Like it knows how to maintain all that homeostasis, but if it has to lose minerals in the process, it will do it. And that's not a good thing for future or other processes in the body that do rely on those minerals to be in the balance that they were in. So, yeah, big topic though. But one of the things is that if the water is in its correct state, if it is structured, then it makes a big difference.
Right.
So I guess, is that where you wanted to go, into the structured side?
Absolutely. And just to go back a little bit, as you said, it's depleting of some of the minerals and it's picking up the slack where it can. But also in our today's society, think about also how many people, as you already know, aren't getting enough of those minerals, aren't getting enough of those proper nutrients, or they're going to the store and they're buying, just the generic kind. And if you're fortunate and are able to do organic, finding, local farmers, doing things to get those, there is ways to do it, but some people just choose not to just altogether. And, a lot of people don't understand then why they're getting sick, or they think it's like, oh, it's because, it's just because I had that ice cream last night. And it's like, that's maybe a part of it, but it's a bigger picture. And you see all the time in just the world we live in, it's so one way or the other. Like in the food industry, it's like, oh, don't eat this. And then like 2 months later, everyone's like, what? Eat it now. And everyone's like, well, I thought I told you not to eat it. And it becomes, and in my belief, it's there to confuse people, and understanding that it's just getting to the basics. Like, oh, don't eat fruit because it has sugar or carbs. And it's like, okay, you want to eat, like, it's not the same. It
Yeah.
has so many more nutrients. And if you're getting it in a pure form, like you said, and I know you do, juices, talking about structured water, when you're getting those fruits and vegetables, would you mind going more into that? Because there's so much in that
Yeah.
that people kind of are like, oh, that's for juicing is for whoever, they're for wimps or whatever people say now. But if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Really good point. So the water that's in a fruit or a vegetable is already completely structured, because what it is, it's bound by a specific ionic charge that's related to its osmolality, which is essentially its salt concentration. And salts are your minerals, so your sodium, potassium, things like that. And so it's also surrounded by cofactors, enzymes, vitamins, co-nutrients, phytonutrients, everything that's built into that organism is perfect by design. And so all of the liquid in it is structured, which means that it's all bioavailable. So
Mm.
water that's just plain water that you bring in doesn't have that structure. It doesn't have that ionic charge. And so therefore it's not readily assimilated by the body. It mostly runs through the body. So then all of the liquid, the water that's in a fruit and vegetable can go into the body, can go into the cells to replenish and to hydrate a cell. So the next best thing is to add some to some water. So if you had a glass of water and you want to make that more bioavailable and structured, you could just squeeze some lemon or some lime juice, for example, into that. Yeah, which it's not only delicious, you can kind of feel it too. When you feel it go into you, can actually feel that it's kind of like being drawn into the body more. And but it's not as pure as just the lemon by itself, or therefore just, a fruit that you eat or several pieces of vegetables that you juice. All of that water is going to be bioavailable. So that's where the structuring comes in. And the structuring comes in as well because of the sunlight that's hit that fruit or vegetable. So that starts there. It starts from, like, all of water. If you've seen the work of, I always forget his name, it's Miyamoto,
Yeah, I have that
Inaru or
written
whatever,
down.
Inaru Miyamoto or something like that, Masamoto, something, where
Yeah,
he shows the structure, the fractal structure of cells, normally when it's been frozen, the water, but how thought affects it and how the environment affects it. So if it's in a harmonious environment and it's got the right signals, it's got a beautiful fractal nature. And if it's got the wrong or like a negative input into the structure, then it's a very broken fragmentation in its fractal structure. And it makes sense. It's like one looks beautiful and the other does not look beautiful. And then that's kind of what's coming in. And that's why it's so important to focus on some of that structure, because that directly affects the structure of the cell, because that's what's feeding the cell. And the cell will only replicate or function based on what it's being fed by. So fed doesn't necessarily just mean food. It means the water and the structure of the water that's coming in. It's highly representative of, the cell and the quality of it.
absolutely. And what's interesting is I've said and through our conversation talking about perception, you're now follow this, this line of logic here. Your perception of being outside in the sun is that it's harmful, it's this, it's that, and then your perception of, oh, eating something, there's dirt, where, I need it from the grocery store. Now you're looking at it with, oh, but it also has this high sugars, and it's a carb. And then so before this even gets to you, and or maybe even your own body shaming, oh, I'm out of shape, I'm this, all this perception of what's around you in the world, that your reality. And now you ingest that. It's, as you said, what's happening now at the molecular level, at the cellular level, is this process of, my perception of the world is in more on the negative side of, or a frequency that maybe isn't where you want to resonate at, right? So then now it's like, well, what's the purpose of fruit? You know what I mean? It's like, or what's the purpose of this vegetable? Why am I doing this? Or why am I trying to get into shape? It's all this, like, what does it even mean? And you start to see those when people start making those changes, enjoying taking in the sun, appreciating the flowers, appreciating their fruit, taking a breath of fresh air. Maybe it's not the most healthiest, but just that change in how you perceive the world, your world, can actually, how you ingest that and what it does in the body could be a completely different response. And I think that's what's so fascinating. And I know you go into this a lot, is that alone you can literally change your reality. And I think more and more people, with today's craziness and how people see shit, whatever, it's like, just take a minute to, okay, how can I see something and just for once, just maybe try to change my perspective or perceive it a little differently. Oh, I'm out in this, I'm out walking barefoot. Well, my feet are going to get dirty. They're going to get muddy. Or maybe something beautiful will happen with it. Maybe my feet have been really tight. Maybe this will feel good there for once. Let me try. You know what I mean? And I think, I don't really juice, but let me try once. Let me do it myself. Let me go through the experience, and I think that's what, little things that people can start doing more of. What would you have anything to add to that?
Sure, yeah. And just being around something like being around flowers or water or whatever, going back to what we were talking about earlier, there's a recognition from your cells with the communication of something outside of you. So
Mhm.
if you're around that perfectly structured nature, it also has an effect on the resonance of the cells within your body. So there's a big difference between being around wildflowers and a waterfall and being around concrete walls and Wi-Fi and paperwork in an office. So if you lived all of your life in a city, it's different from, your cells will operate differently from somebody that's around, the perfection of nature in all of its perfect structure all of the time, because of that communication between your body and its external environment. Yeah, I just think, it's so complex. There's so much to go into with all of that. So
Yeah.
it's
I know I'm throwing big things at you, but I love talking about this stuff. And in our field, my field, and people around me, we don't necessarily talk about this as much. Someone with like yourself who has the experience and loves to go into it as well. I definitely wanted to just go take this journey.
yeah,
So I appreciate you doing it with me, man. It's because we're
yeah.
in color, obviously.
But
Um,
it's also, I guess, one thing I'll add to that is what is going through the mind, because as you've been saying, the mind just has a huge bearing on the health and the structure of a cell. So when you're in that environment and you're actually able to ask, and one of the questions, somebody doesn't really understand their life purpose, so to speak, and we can probably get into that as well if you want. But if
yes.
you're just in nature and you're like actually observing and asking questions, you're like, look at these flowers. They're perfectly living out their purpose of being in a flower. What is that? How is that? And you just kind of like looking at that and gleaning wisdom from that. It can give you a feeling of, or it can speak to you. So your cells can get an idea of their purpose, for example, and then that can, if you're listening, that can filter up into the mind, where it can help you to understand a bit more of your own purpose in being and living out the perfection of the creation that you are. And it all just comes from being around something as perfect as a flower or a pool of water or something.
Well, what I agree. I think going back to what you said about the structure of water is that it's the bioavailability of fruit or vegetable and what's within it is so perfect. As people have said, God has given you a piece of fruit. It's in the perfect size, in the perfect dimensions to give you everything that you need in that moment when you find it. And that for me has been one of those revelations of looking at it going, not only is the symmetry and the geometrical shape of some of these, it's just so beautiful. And you're going, this just didn't show up here. There's a purpose. There was purpose behind that. And I'm with you, is just being able to look at it, or a flower. I have my son, we go walk around the courtyard and just in our area, and we look at stuff, and watching it through his eyes is really heightened my own experience, already, with everything that I've already been doing, because I've been able to just sit and with him and be like, don't put it in your mouth. But, in the moment that we're both looking at it with curiosity, it really puts you in that there's a purpose in this moment. He's observing it for the first time and really soaking it in. And I'm just going like, how is he seeing this? And then going, wait, how do I see this? What am I seeing? And it's just a simple leaf that you pick up. And
Yeah.
when you really go down that, you start to go, oh, wow, as we said in the last conversation, I have more purpose here than I've even realized. Have more control over my emotions. I can, regulate thoughts over time. It takes practice, but being able to allow myself to sit with thoughts. I know you said in other conversations of, man, I'm feeling angry, but being able to be an observer and going, all right, hello, angry. What are you doing here today? Let me be observed. Let me be like, thank you for this moment. thank you for in that moment trying to protect me with anger, but maybe I don't need that right now. But
Yeah.
I hear you, I see you, I experience you. And I think that's the one thing we get so close-minded to that. And I won't go into the science of it, but I think it is a beautiful thing when you can start recognizing the little things in life and then understanding your purpose through that. So is there anything else you'd like to add in that regard, or?
Um, yeah, well, you can always just ask the how or the why question. Like it's with whatever it's a leaf or whatever, for example, like you said, and it's like, well, what is a leaf? And then it's like, well, it's made of this, but why? And then, well, because, and then as soon as you get like 3 or 4 levels of why, most people can't get past the third or fourth,
Yeah,
and they will get to a mind stillness, or I guess the other way of putting it is, if you can see what's on the other side of that leaf, you can see the source of all things. And but it's just such a simple thing, but it's not very easy, because to comprehend that can take a lot of it. I guess it's literally that. It's the simplicity is where all the answers are. It's not in something super complex and really understanding the science and fundamental structure from a physical point of view of a leaf. And then, because really that can take you away from it. And it's the answer, and the balance point is always just in that simplicity. But in that simplicity comes the ability to actually still the mind and the body and everything else long enough to actually glean the information directly from it. So the leaf can tell you actually what it is and what life is all about. Because when you learn the way we learn in our indoctrination system, we think we're intelligent because we go, well, a leaf is made of this and it's got cellulose and it's got these, whatever you call the veins that are in a leaf. I can't even remember, but it's like, you can do it, and then you just do a multiple choice test and you're like, yeah, I can name cellulose, that's answer C. But really you don't know anything about a leaf.
right.
Like if I tell you a cow has 4 legs and 4 stomachs, it doesn't mean I know what the function, like how a cow functions in nature and its role in nature and it's where it comes from. And nothing about doing a test about a cow or a leaf actually allows me to function in the world with those things, or to understand where they come from and therefore where I come from, or to find deeper meaning. None of that is there in that scientific rote learning. Not scientific, but the way our educational system uses science and in the rote learning, it completely removes you from actually knowing what that is. And then there's a quote that's an old Indian proverb that says, if you teach the boy the name of a bird, then he never sees that bird again.
Yeah,
He sees like an eagle or whatever. He sees the label, but he's lost that wonder. It's like what you were saying, when you and your son look at a leaf or something, there's that wonder and there's that awe and that figuring out. But then as soon as you can start labeling stuff, oh yeah, well, that's a leaf. It's a this, that, and the other name, genus, blah, 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 whatever.
yeah.
And then you're off looking at something else, but you've completely missed the actual leaf. You just think you know it because you can label it.
And that's what people we do with ourselves. And a lot of people don't take a minute to observe themselves and do that, of going, like, oh yeah, I got like, 5 fingers this hand, 5 fingers this hand, I got, shoulder, knee, yeah, okay, whatever. But then just taking a moment and genuinely, and I'm not saying doing it, taking drugs, but like looking at your hand and genuinely with curiosity, looking at yourself with that same, and going like, what, like, just, you know what I mean? And it seems everyone's like, you always see the stoner movies, or like the people are like, oh my God. Like, and I'm not saying you have to go to that length, but just genuinely ask, like, why is this moving? And you could be like, well, it's like the neurological connection. And it's like, okay, sure. But what about the moments when someone, gets their hand taken off and they still have that phantom feeling?
Mm.
It's like, well, the nerves are, it's like, okay, just try to get yourself out of, just as you said, the science and the multiple choice mindset of just, but really digging deep and going, what am I doing? What is this? How is this happening? As you said, the what, the who's and the whys, and starting there, man, you start to, I mean, at least for myself and clients I talk to, it starts to open up so many more questions and so much more curiosity. And as you've said in the past, and I agree with you, when we move creativity and looking at things with the creative mind and learning how to open your mind to new possibilities.
Mm.
And I think that's such an important thing in life. And that's what with our system today, it takes away creativity, it takes away curiosity. It's pushing you more to just do this, say this, and that's how you're gonna get by. And some people enjoy that, or they think they enjoy that, and then they come to you or they come to me, and something in their life isn't fulfilled. And why are you here? Well, I want to look like this. And as we said last time, you start realizing like they didn't want that. So why did you say it? It's like that misunderstanding of how they perceive themselves and what their purpose is, or what their purpose of coming to the gym. Or, you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How, as I was saying before, with like the way you perceive light and how it hits your food, it's the same cycle. It's like if you don't take a minute to just observe yourself, really take yourself in, it can trickle in such a this vast way that you don't even realize. Is it all started from you just not appreciating yourself?
Yeah. And even, I'm just going to sit on this cushion, even to the point where, if you just do this thing and you're looking at your hand and then it's moving and that, and then you just go, well, what's doing the looking? Like, what is it that's looking at my hand? Like that question alone can be like, what the hell? Like, what is looking at my hand?
Right. Well, even just people who look at, they see, say, a car crash and how people perceive something that they both just looked at, and I think where we get caught up now is this, people want to bicker about it. They want to fight, being like, no, I saw it this way. No, I saw it this way. Instead of being like, so how did you see it that way? Like explain, like genuinely asking, like, how did you see it that way?
Mm.
And then I think even taking a step further is asking yourself, like, oh, I feel shitty about myself, or, oh, I'm a big failure. I never get, it's like, okay, instead of fighting that and be like, no, I can't think that way. Stop. Everyone tells me to have a good mindset, going, okay, well, why do you think that? Why do you think that you're a failure? Because you didn't complete this one thing? All right, let me, it starts so simple. And going back to your experience with the light shining, the subtlety of that moment, it is being able to look at the subtleties of our own lives and just going, all right, let me look at this subtle thing from a different point of view. Let me see if it changes my perception,
Yeah.
And I think that's where everyone can hopefully take away something in that regard, of just starting simply asking questions. Why? I think with having a kid, everyone's like, oh, your kid's gonna start asking a lot of questions. And if it dawned on me, I'm like, I still ask a lot of questions. My fiance is like, dude, do you always ask this many questions? Like, I'm just genuinely curious. And then being able to have my son, and I've said this over and over, I want to learn things, because if he's like, Dad, why is this? And if I'm just going, just because, that's what people say. It's just because, it's not asking questions. What I've already, what I'm doing is I'm limiting my own ability to how I perceive the world. And I'm taking away purpose from what I feel is a good purpose of, being a good father, being there, guiding, giving knowledge. So I'm just, you start to see how all these things of just not asking questions and not being present really be, work in a detrimental way. So
Yeah.
But
It's one of the worst ways you can wreck a kid is to just go, oh, just because, or stop asking questions. No, everybody does that. Just, that's kind of like, the kid is so open to every possibility. And do you know what divergent thinking is? There's divergent, convergent, there's different. Divergent.
I've heard, if you don't mind explaining.
Yeah, it's basically what is present in every kid, and then it gets conditioned out. So the example that I usually give is, if you said to somebody, if you asked a question, how many ways can you close a door, for example, then somebody might go, two. Like an adult might say two. They go, you can push it closed, or you can be on the other side and pull it closed. But then somebody else might go, oh, no, you could probably do it three ways, because you could push it with your hand or you could bump it with your hip. So now they're thinking a bit more. And so you can start thinking a bit more. But divergent thinking is like, you don't come to a concrete answer as if there's a concrete reality in the first place, because you go, well, what kind of door is it? Like, does it hinge, or does it slide up and down, or does it slide this way? Is it automatic? What's it made of? How heavy is it? Does it have a handle? What's the handle made of? Like, you ask all these questions before you give an answer, because otherwise you're making absolutes in your mind that aren't necessarily there. And that's present in basically all kids. And then up to once they've been in the schooling system for about a year or two, it's pretty much gone. By the time they're past like early grades 1 through to 5 sort of thing, it's pretty much gone. The divergent thinking has been conditioned out. And so when kids are asking so many questions, it's such a great thing to be able to go, I understand their intelligence already and say, well, I don't know, what do you think it is? And like look at it with them, like you do, like you're both looking at it. You're not just like, well, I'm up here and you're down there, I'm just going to tell you. Kind of, you both look at it, you go, wow, what is this? And how does this work? And what do you reckon it's made from? I reckon it's made from like, dinosaur eggs and that. Really? Well, that could, like,
Yeah.
It's like so many parents just go, no, that's silly. Don't say that. It's made from this. It's made from calcium. You just, to be able to let them indulge in their imagination and figuring out things for themselves is such a better lesson than telling them that an eggshell is made out of calcium and therefore they don't need to ask any questions anymore because now they know. I know what an eggshell is. It's calcium. But that whole thing of saying it's made from some dinosaur egg remnant mixed with blowflies or something, like that's way more imaginative, and that's actually getting to more of an answer than our adult answer of just saying what we think it is because we just believe what we read in a book that might not even be made out of just what we think it is. So,
well, in going even deeper into going back to the frequency aspect is think about the difference in frequency of just having that experience with not even with your kid, but with other people of just that exchange of like, well, what do you think it is?
yeah.
And instead of being like, oh, this is what it is, stop. I mean, that frequency of that interaction with someone else or even yourself is you see changes your body, your body language. People read a lot into body language or just your facial expressions. And it's so it is interesting is when you start to have these beautiful conversations, even if you don't agree with somebody, or even if you don't agree with yourself in whatever that moment is, you'd be like, all right, at least I've heard, as you said, I've opened my mind to different thoughts, different outcomes. And I think when people can start at least doing subtle things in that nature, whether it's talking to a friend about whatever everyone's talking about, it becomes a situation where you can really see purpose in your life in of going, wow, I was able to go into this experience, not let my emotions get the best of me, not see myself collapsing and then walking away fuming or feeling I wasn't heard or feeling that they didn't want to hear my point of view. It's like, all right, they brought up good points, whether I agree or not. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And it can change your resonance. It can change your purpose of going, hey, I'm not here to prove somebody wrong. I'm not here to prove myself wrong or right. I'm just here to be a witness. I'm here to observe.
Yeah.
And such a power in that, and it feels this lightness. I mean, as I said the other day about people using words they don't even realize. When someone walks into a room, they're like, dude, that person just glows. Well, why do we say that? Why do we use words that we maybe don't even realize? And it's because it's at the deeper level of my belief, it's this ingrained understanding of like, I'm seeing to some capacity this glow with this person, or someone who's like, dude, this dude's like a ball buster. He just takes all this energy every time he walks in. You feel that energy, you feel that exchange, you're observing. So I think it's important to pay attention to it. If anyone takes anything away, just pay attention to how you respond to other people. Are you immediately, I know everything about this, would you agree to some extent?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And with that, with the resonance thing as well, I think just to relate it back to the kids and asking them what they think, like when I used to train people in gyms, and we spoke about last time, a lot of it becomes therapy, especially if they're just warming up on a treadmill or whatever, because that's their preferred way to whatever. And then they'll start telling you their problems. They're like, what do you think I should do about this? And what do you think I should do about this? And I realized a great way to preserve my own energy and also to help them increase theirs was to just go like, I don't know, what do you think you should do? And then they'll just blah, blah, blah. And they just kind of like come to their own answers. But it's almost like, yeah, it's like they're creating a different structure within themselves. There's a different energy then that they're actually empowering their own self because they already kind of know what they should do best. But it's like, I don't really know what's best for them, but they kind of do. So a lot of the time they'll have the answer already. They just, if you ask them, same as a kid, I don't know, what do you reckon that's made out of? You do it for people too. I don't know, what do you reckon you should do? And then they just say the answer.
Yeah. And then they look at you going like, thanks, man. I really appreciate your input. You're like, got it. But it's funny you say that. I actually just, I was with a client on Saturday and we had this exchange where usually we'll talk a little bit in the beginning, see how he's, very high strung job, all these things. And he was just like, hey man, can we just talk today? And I was like, yeah, man, just, I've been in this before. So I was like, absolutely. And he just wanted to vent and talk about what was going on in his life and all the ups and downs of everything happening. And he would go on a certain specific point that I don't necessarily agree on, but he'd be like, right? And I'd be like, I can see how you see it that way. Absolutely. And for him, just that exchange, it wasn't necessarily trying to persuade me. It was just trying to get whatever was off his chest. And he's
Yeah.
had a lot of injuries and he's gone through a lot of similar injuries. So there's a lot of trauma there. But the takeaway at the end was just being able to go, you know what, man, when you feel those moments come on, just give yourself a minute to breathe and see if you have the same emotion afterwards. And he was like, and he then afterwards was saying, dude, thank you for all this breathing stuff. It's been so helpful. And just hearing him say that, going, the thing you do every day, just being able to have witness to that was what is helping you through these hard times. And it's not anything that I'm doing. It's just being able to be there with him, not necessarily try to have it be a debate, just hear what he's saying and being like, oh man, it just sounds like it's taking the wind out of you a little bit. You're getting flustered. Is that what you're feeling? Yeah, man. Well, as you felt before when we breathe during our moves and you're feeling winded, maybe not flustered, just winded. How does it make you feel? He's like, feels great. I'm like,
Yeah.
tell me how it feels. And so you start to see that this ability to come back to self, being witness to self, witness to your surroundings, open-minded, it can really start to make those changes that we're always striving for. And we think it has to be, oh, I have to go on this whole diet, or I have to go on this 30-day cleanse and the whole 30s and things, or I have to go to the top of a mountain to have this experience. And it's not always the case. And I think if we don't mind talking, if I can have you look for a little bit more, talk about music, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Just what the power of music, talking about frequency, talking about, also we said before, having people to talk to, community, the power of music in that sense. Would you mind elaborating from your point of view on what music means?
Sure. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I think what I'll do is just give a little quick, just to kind of recap what we spoke about with frequency and cells and cell structure and all that kind of thing. So, the everything that is in the micro is reflected in the macro and vice versa. So the cell, even going into breaking down a cell into its constituent parts, right down to the tiniest particles, they're all reflected in the larger organism and in the larger environment and world and cosmos around us. So what's important to, I guess, know about that, more than being able to identify parts of a cell and what affects what within a cell, is what resonant frequencies affect the structure of that and therefore the organism. So that's the quality of the light. It's the type of sound, and that's what we'll talk about now, the type of thoughts, and then the water and the food that enter the body. So anything that enters the body or the body is surrounded by will affect that resonant frequency or structure of the body and therefore the cells, or you could say the cells and therefore the body, because they're just mirror images of each other. Right. So moving into the music side, sound has such a fundamental effect on us, because sound itself is like light. It's just a frequency. It's literally just a series of fluctuating waves that we measure in hertz, or we measure in different, or decibels. We measure it in frequency. And some we can, like light, there's some we can see, but there's others that affect us that we can't see. And sound we hear from 20 to 20,000 hertz, but there's sounds below and above that, like we don't hear what a dog will hear, or there's sound we can't hear, but we'll feel a deep rumble or a vibration, and we'll feel that. So all of it is vibration, and all of it affects the way cells vibrate. So everything's just in this wonderful concert, and some of it we just can't comprehend, and we don't like logically or even auditorially hear, but we feel. That's why you can't hear something, but the hairs on the back of your neck will prick up. You're still experiencing the sound, and it's having an effect on the physiology of the body. So from a community point of view too, I think that music is just that. Well, a lot of people think, it's not my thought, but music is the universal language. Like French can't understand like Italian, and then can't understand, like Spanish or whatever, or Chinese or something like that. But music is the same. Like a violin in any country is the same instrument with the same notes, the same sounds, and everything. So I think it's the unifying. I think sound and music is really the unifying part of humanity. And then science, whether it's true or not, tells us that it's the only thing that actually properly engages the whole of the brain. And to the point where you see music used in a lot of therapies for not only PTSD, but also kids with a lot of neural disabilities and things. And music just seems to reach them in ways that other things can't, as a therapy to heal, to actually make neural connections and heal them. And it's just such a powerful thing. So if you consider what must be happening on a cellular level, you're getting actual growth of cells in a healthy manner by listening to the music. So that just shows how much power is in something like sound and light to work on the fundamental basic building block of the body, which is your cells and your cell structure, to create something brand new in the body. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and with also, a lot of the music we hear today, being much very like monotonous beat. It's the same beat, or you hear, when you really hear lyrics, people resonate because it's maybe traumatic lyrics. You hear a lot of these big songs that we hear all the time where the music might be that upbeat four chord progression, but then you hear the lyrics and it's about heartache. And I think it can really mess with people's minds. And on the opposite end, obviously it's a beautiful thing, but you think, oh, this is a great song, but not realizing, as you said, you're feeling the resonance of that. You're feeling the frequency in a way where it's actually going like, yeah, this is the trauma that I'm feeling. I connect to this. And not to say there aren't good songs that do have that, but being able to, if you're somebody who listens to music and use music as that escape or that place to go to really feel um, free or enlightened, you start to realize, oh man, maybe let me listen to some more upbeat songs, and not necessarily like chipper, but more of something that has that sound where it makes you go like, oof, that was a beautiful riff there, or that was a beautiful wave there, or the music or the lyrics themselves are talking more from a place of community and love, and not this love where it's this like a superficial love, but you know f- you know what I'm saying. And I think that's it, you start to see the power in those, and how that manifests, even just how your day is. People who go and drive and they're like, I just love having the windows down and I turn up the music, and just, more often than not, they're listening to something that's upbeat, and they might not even realize that they're picking that selection. They do know, because they have like a playlist, right? And they're like, this is for this mood, or this is for that mood. And so I think paying more attention to that, I think, would you agree that people can really get something from that experience of,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So there's a few ways you can use that to your advantage. One is to understand the moods or the states that certain music can elicit in you. And that's why people will listen to mood music to relax. They'll listen to meditative music to get the heart kind of, or a theta state or a alpha or beta, whatever, in the brain waves. And then you've got the element where it can be important to challenge yourself. So it's not necessarily music that you would want to reach for, but the effect that it has, and therefore you expose yourself to it. Because usually what we're resisting could be something that, I mean, fair enough, if something's just shit music, don't expose yourself to that. But it's like, you could have, some people have an aversion to some classical music or some kind of world music, but it's only because it's not what they're used to. And within that can be a lot of healing. And sometimes it's the trauma that's in you that can be resolved from the music, and it's resisting being seen or felt. So it'll resist the music, but it's not that the music's bad. It's that your inner trauma in the cell is resisting that frequency, because they're gonna have an effect on each other. And so, to the point where not all music on the radio is bad, but these days it's a pretty good bet that if it's on the radio, it's got programming in it. Because if you're in common time, 4/4 time, the nervous system understands that really well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, like it just like gets right into the nervous system. And because it can do that, you can embed it with information that will program the nervous system. And so that's why certain tempos, which is your beats per minute, usually around 60 or 120 beats per minute, is very symbiotic with the body. And then when you have the repetitive nature of modern pop music with some of the lyrics that are in it and the content of the songs, really easy to program people through the music. So if you look at a lot of music that comes from other cultures that isn't sort of result of that, or isn't adulterated the same way, quite often they're not playing in 4. They're playing in odd times like 5, 7, 9, 11. Indian music can be like have many cycles before it repeats in classic Indian stuff, especially when you're playing tablas and things like that, like 138 beat cycles, when Western people are used to counting to 4 and then repeating, and they're counting to 138 before they repeat their phrase. It's like, you imagine the dexterity of the mind that's required to engage in that. You can only be wholly and solely present. And then you imagine what's happening in the cell structure. And so a lot of these people use music not just as an escape, which it can be, but as a path to enlightenment or as a path to self-growth, and completely creating a resonant chamber of the body. So every cell is in communication perfectly. And so it's important to consider the information that's being brought in. And then because it's a universal language, have you ever seen Rick Beato on YouTube?
No, I have not.
Oh, he's cool. I'll send you one of his clips after. He's got a son, forget his name, Jaden or something. Anyway, this kid's like 7 or 8 years old with perfect pitch. And Rick got popular, not just because he's a great musician and producer, but his kid got so many views because Rick would play any note on an instrument and the kid just go A, G, B flat, F. He just like named the notes, which is sort of impressive. But what was most impressive is he plays some weird diminished jazz chord, like each finger playing a note on the piano. And then the kid will hear it and then he'll go A, F, G sharp, B, C, F sharp. And he's like naming every note. He can hear every note and pitch them and name every note. And the way he did that, got to that, is Rick was saying the same way a kid, if they're like really young and they're in a household or a community and they're exposed to Mandarin, Japanese, English, German, French, and Spanish, they'll learn how to speak all those languages fluently, like unlimited number of languages. 10 languages, don't worry, they'll learn them all, but only up to a certain point. Once you reach a certain age, the mind doesn't have the ability to do that. So if you expose a young kid to very complex and challenging music, it creates way different neural pathways in the brain, and then they'll develop perfect pitch. They'll develop that ability to understand many different timbres, many different time signatures, note selections, and whatever. Then further to the programming, stop me when I go too far, but
I'm in, man.
Further to the programming, we've got, if you imagine that music, as I said, sound as a tone can carry within it a lot of information. You hear, like, I think that's the way birds kind of communicate. They emit a tone, and within that tone can be embedded so much information about procreation, food, the environment, rain coming, whatever. But it's not like, hey, by the way, I'm horny and let's make some babies. And by the way, there's a storm coming in 2 days. And by the way, this linear language, it's just like one tone and all of that's embedded in there. And in our musical structure in the West, we have what's called the tempered scale. So we've reduced it down to 12 tones. Now that does have a mathematical importance, but at the same time, if you go from A to B as a tone, you're missing out on like at least 100 cents of tone and sound within that. So you're missing out on information. It's like you go here, then nothing, then here, then nothing, then here. But what's in here? There's still information. So if you're like missing that information, it's like, what's in there? Are we being, it's like saying every third or fourth word in a sentence. You're not really going to get what the guy's saying because you're not getting all the information. And so in our instruments, in our tonal scale, a lot of that's been brought out, which is one of the reasons I like, guitar and stringed instruments, because you can do all these micro bends that still have all of that information stored in it. Yeah, there's so much we could go into in music.
Oh, I love it. No, I think it's something that everyone who is listening can just, from at least understanding, like, hey, I like music, being able to pay attention to the understanding that it carries, as you said, this information. It's not just a frequency. It's not just oh, they're playing a note. It's also the intentions behind it, what's happening, the in-betweens of those. If you're listening to something that really moves you, people cry, people laugh, people feel sorrows, past traumas will come to the surface when you hear a song that you played or you had with a, an ex-girlfriend or whatever. You're like, oh man, it brings you right to that moment. Like it carries that memory through that frequency. So it's not
Yeah.
just, oh, it's just this. And being able for people to connect and going, let me, as you said, step outside of what is maybe comfortable music that I listen to of, Mozart's and Beethoven's and Chopin and all these different ones that might be a little bit out of your wheelhouse, or maybe, as you said, listening to, tribal music, or, something where there's 138, different notes before you repeat yourself, and just being able to go, all right, well, like, maybe I don't necessarily understand it right now, but let me experience it. Let me understand in the moment. All right, that sounds good. Oh, that sounded different to me. Wow, this doesn't sound like it's repeating, and then just being able to really appreciate that whole thing. And as you said, oh, there's so much present awareness in that moment to play all those notes before you repeat yourself, going, wow, that is that's now I see it differently. Like I'm interested, because you don't realize that that's happening. And we see guitar solos now where it's like someone might be playing a simple riff and you're like, whoa, that's sick. But then you watch somebody who's doing something that might not sound what in your mind is perfect, or your ears is like perfect, but you're like watching their fingers and you're going, oh my gosh. And now you have a whole new appreciation for your perception of that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and I think just going, as you said, being the universal language for a lot of people, there's such a way for us to connect in such a beautiful way of, you see, go to a concert, you see all the lights up, or you see people in a room, whatever their other beliefs are, they're all just sitting there listening and just appreciating just that moment, the present moment.
Yeah.
Appreciating themselves, right? Of like, hey man, like I can sit with myself in this moment here and not think about anything else and just be in this frequency or in this light. And I think that's just a thing that people need to hopefully for themselves see more. I know for myself, I never played music until I was 18. I was similar to you, kind of, where I was like, all right, well, it'll be cool. Hopefully girls like it. And then the more I played, the more I became so like, felt like, man, I'm doing something. I'm playing chords, but then you start getting the moving where it moves you in such a way where you're like, turn the lights off and just be with my thoughts and just let my fingers do whatever. If it sounds shit, whatever, man. But I'm in that moment. I'm taking in those frequencies. And I don't know if you've ever done that and created your own songs, I'm assuming, but there's such
Yeah.
energy that comes with it. So whenever you play it again, you're like, this came from, where did this come from?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it goes
Yeah.
back to that, like, how am I seeing this? How am I experiencing this? And it brings you to a purpose of like, this wasn't just an accident. I wasn't just an accident. This moment I just created or was a part of wasn't an accident. There's reason for this.
Mm.
So I don't know if you've had yourself in those moments at all during.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like creation coming through you into the world so that other people can see where creation comes from, or
Right.
to get a glimpse of it. Not it, but a representation of it, of God, of the higher
Right.
force of creativity that flows through all things, which is amazing. That's why people resonate so strongly with art and music, because, and like, one of the best things about, I went to Tool in January. They came out, and I just saw so many different people there. I guess you do at other concerts too, but you kind of have a perception of who would go to the concert. And you've got families there, people who I know who are librarians, people who are in CEO kind of business roles. You got hippies, you got metalheads, and you just see everybody has the same experience. Everybody's eyes say the same thing when they walk out of that concert, despite the hugely varying backgrounds that they come from, which makes me think that it's just such a glue. It's just such a unifying glue for humanity to all experience that and all be moved the same. Not necessarily experience the same thing, but all be moved the same. And then just to be not the same person when they left as they were when they came in. Like, that's so powerful for what music can do. And actually with Tool as well, one of the best things I think is when we're talking about this and we play music, but people listening might think, well, I don't have a musical bone in my body. I don't really gel with this. Like, I can't play a guitar and play a violin and all that sort of stuff. But everybody understands rhythm. Like everybody understands melody too, whether you can pick up an instrument and play it. You understand it because you recognize it, unless you're literally tone deaf. But if you're literally tone deaf, you won't enjoy music.
Right.
Like you're not going to enjoy listening to your favorite song and even singing along in the shower, even if you're a shit singer, because you can recognize what melody is. It's up here, it's down here. And oh, when he hits that note, oh, I feel it right here.
Yep.
Like you can understand music even if you can't play it or sing it. But everybody understands rhythm because a certain extent, if you can walk, you can count to 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Right.
Then you can count to 4, and you can anyone can basically follow rhythm. And so one of the things about Tool that's really powerful is they use a lot of polyrhythms or cross rhythms, where one instrument's playing in one time signature, another's playing in another, and the drummer in particular is playing in 3 or 4 at once on his own. And then the singer's singing in something else. And when you feel it, or if you play along to it, you feel a spiral. And this is important because even last night I did this satsang with a girl who wanted me to sit in on one, and the people are talking about a spiral and the way spirals work. And it's like, you know what, all these people are intellectualizing something. It's this mental construct that it's not part of them. But when you can sit and listen to music that does that, you can actually feel that spiral, and it's a part of your body. Then it's not just like a mental construct, and it's so immensely powerful to feel spiraling based on rhythms that are here and here and here, and they spiral around until at one point they'll all connect on the one downbeat, but it might take 20 something cycles to get to there or more. And it's just, it really, that the information that is in that is beyond just what you could read or what you can understand intellectually. It's a complete embodiment of information. So, for example, I think, a lot of people have a fascination with numbers. So a lot of people have a fascination with, they say, I always use 11 because 11's a common thing. People go, oh, well, 11 is like, means this and it means that. And 11 is 2, 1. So that's a 2. So it's 11 or a 2. And it's like, no, it's not. It's 11. You can't get 2 out of 11. Like we denote it with 2 1s, but Japanese denotes it with a 10 and a 1. So there's no 2 in that. You can get a 10 or a 1 or an 11, but there's no 2. So it can't be a universal truth because we denote it one way. Other languages denote it another way. So it's so therefore it's like this construct of the mind. So then I say, well, instead of just thinking about numerology or whatever that way, I'm not saying you're wrong. It's just, why don't you try to experience it yourself? And the way you can experience 11 is to play music in a time signature of 11/8. So you have 11 eighth notes before it comes back to the first. And then once you can do that, you realize 11 is infinite, because you could have an infinite different types of music, different cadences, different tempos, different melody structures that all fit that 11 structure, but they're all different. Yeah. So therefore 11 is actually infinite. Not only is it infinite, but you can feel it, and you can feel it in an infinite number of ways through music and just through rhythm to start with, and then building melody and then building other things. It's like, it's such a deeper way to understand something than to just intellectualize a number or a concept.
Absolutely. And for as you said, the people maybe who don't play music and understand this, think about when you listen to a cover. You might get someone who plays a cover of a song that you like in a certain, cadence, but all they've done is maybe changed that cadence. And for you, you're like, I love this cover because it has it's the same thing in many ways, but they've just made some slight adjustments to give it its own life, to give it, and it brings you back and like this going like, wow, feels like a whole new song, or it just gives me a whole new emotion compared to an original. So I think people maybe who don't know to this extent understand hopefully that of like, so you're feeling this whole change in your body when you maybe hear something, as you said, with some subtle differences, some subtle changes, and it gives you a whole new perception on that song or that, those lyrics. And I think that going back to the main topics of like finding purpose, understanding your perception, and that's the music does such a good job at bringing all those things into the mix of, as you said, people walking out of a concert and having a whole new perception on their life of like, man, I'm going to just play guitar. I want to play guitar. You know what, man? I want to put this song, this CD on, or put it on my iPod and just put it on repeat for the next couple weeks because I'm just so moved by it. And it's something as simple as you said, is just having people playing different notes at different times. I mean, that's not simple itself, but just how it can change your whole experience of like, wait, this doesn't sound right. And then all of a sudden it all comes together and like, whoa, this is amazing.
Yeah.
No, dude, I love talking about this stuff. If
Yeah.
I don't mind, I would love to just end with sharing you a beautiful story that I've had with
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
So as I talking about in big higher purpose, before our my fiance and I, had our son, we were talking about, if this is something we want to do, taking a moment and really thinking about it. Obviously, that's a big step moving forward, all these things. And I actually that night went to bed and I had this dream that I was walking on the beach and my my son was in front of me, but I can only see the back of his head. And as you were talking the other day about lucid dreaming, I allowed myself to be in the dream because there was something that I've never experienced before. And in the clouds was this melody. And I had this thought of just like, remember that, remember this melody, remember this moment. Like, so I allow myself to just be in that dream, present in the dream. And it was in that moment for me, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And I was like, what is this? And I was like, so I woke up and I immediately grabbed my guitar and I just like figured it out. And so what's so interesting is I played it and then we found out a couple months later that, she was pregnant. And then we found out she had a boy. And I was like, this is not random.
Yeah.
I could have sat there before and been like, my perception of life was like, oh, it's just this, we're just nothing. We're in this infinite nothing. And then that made me go, this is all more connected than we realize. There is more purpose, not just myself, but everybody has a purpose. And I show that story because when I would play the song, that was the first time I ever seen him smile when I played that song. She cries when she hears it. And it's not that I'm doing anything crazy. I'm this amazing guitar player, but it's just the energy that goes behind it.
Mm.
It made me even realize like, oh, I see more purpose now. And not everyone has that same one, just like your experience with skateboard and being on there. For me, it was a little more drastic but it was the subtlety of just, let me go to sleep and sit with this thought. This is a big decision, but let me just be with the thought. What comes from that? And that's what happened for me. But that's what the power of music is for me is it literally has changed my life, how I see the world, how I experience the world, my purpose. So I just think that's why I wanted to go into music as well, just to hear how, if you've had experiences with music in that regard for yourself, um, in some similarities.
Yeah, well, for sure. But I think before I get into that, it's I just think that's amazing. That what your story just really highlights the fact that there is a real energetic imprint in behind or underneath any physical reality. So before you even had, I love that story. That's
Thanks.
so cool.
Well, what's even funny is talking about physical light is we were on the beach. My fiance is from Hawaii, and so we were on this beach in Hawaii. It felt like I was in Hawaii, but there was this light coming from the sound that was
Yeah,
in the
right.
clouds, and like I was looking at, not I could hear it, but I could see the light from it too. And so it was the culmination of all these things that we're talking about, and it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll send you a clip of it so you can hear it if you're interested. But it was
yeah,
just,
definitely. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, definitely. Yeah. You
um,
know, that's funny because I had a dream about that sort of thing as well. At about it was also because I was starting to get in, when I was younger, I started to get into the idea that if we evolve from our speaking language, we would evolve to a tonal language before we just got complete ESP and whatever, or whatever you call that when you read each other's minds.
yeah,
And yeah, I just saw it as a tonal language. And then I saw it as tones emitting colors and pictures, essentially. And then I was watching an episode of Futurama, which is made by the guys who make The Simpsons, which are Freemasons, and they have a lot of access to information that, we're not privy to, and they give it to us through the medium of things. So we go, it's just a cartoon and it's not real
right,
and
of
whatever. But they're telling us exactly what's going on. And
course,
there's this instrument that Fry, who's a dumbass, but he becomes really intelligent from a brain injury or something stuck up his, whatever it was. No, Homer got something stuck up his nose. Fry, anyway, whatever it is, some brain thing that made him really intelligent. And the girl, Leela, who he's always liked, now starts to like him because he's actually articulate and intelligent now. And anyway, he learns how to play this instrument that's like it's really advanced instrument. You have to be able to play it. Not anyone can play it. And it's sort of like a flute recorder thing with this thing on the end. And as you play it, you're emitting beautiful tones, but out of it comes like a holographic colors of mostly purple and stuff, like a real radiant energy of color and picture in it. And I'm like, I saw it and I was like, that's what I pictured like ages ago when I was a kid. That's it. And he's playing it. And it's so funny that like you've seen something similar. And I think a lot of people probably have. But I just think that that's where we have the capability, and it does show us that relationship between light, sound, energy, frequency, vibration, and what we experience and what we hold. And it's just such a shame we're so cut off and disconnected and distracted from that with everything that we do in our society, because that's where we should be living. We should be living in that most of the time.
Yeah. And what I think what's also scary for a lot of people is when you start to see those things or experience those things, whether it's through programming or whatever, they find themselves going, I don't know if I want that type of quote unquote power, because it makes you then have to reevaluate your life of like, wait a minute, I thought the world was just this mundane thing, or I thought it was just this, you go do this and this is what happens, or oh, this guy's just playing an instrument, but there's so much more behind it. And that can get, I think that can get scary for people. As we talk, fear can create these traumas. If you're living in fears, it can create these traumas and at the cellular level, your surrounding, what energy you're emitting to the around you. And I think some people are just like, it's just easier to live here because this is what I know, rather than being able to open themselves up and going, holy cow, like there's so much more here. Let me take a minute and just go, all right, what else around me is different? Is there anything that I can question, be curious about? And I think when people find themselves doing that with whatever it is, whether having a hobby with music or woodworking or jewelry or going just on nature walks, you start to see people tapping into that a little bit more each and every time. And when you can see people who are doing that and then they talk about it, or you just see it in their eyes and in the way they hold themselves, it becomes this, like, I want what that person has. How are you like this? Or what is it that you have that I haven't seen yet? And when people can start having that open conversation about those different things, I think it really opens us up to having that ability to have these types of one-on-ones, and where we're just riffing and going like, yes, I totally know what you mean.
Yeah.
You saw that too? Yeah. It was a dragon flying by.
Yeah. Yeah, and imagine if more people talked about it with each other than just the usual, oh, how's it going? How's this going? How's the job? And are you getting a raise? And are you doing this? And you're doing that? It's like most people actually have these experiences. A lot of people have these subtle things, which is what we started talking about at the beginning, but don't necessarily realize them. But if they just express them more, they'd realize, oh, wow, you've seen that? I've seen that too. Or I heard that, or I had that dream about that. Like so many people would have the same dreams, but we don't talk about it as much because it's not part of the narrative of our society. We more talk about the mundane and fitting into the system, and what's like, you do talk about this and you don't talk about that, but what if we did? And we have these kind of conversations where we just go, wow, you're on the other side of the world and we've had really similar things. And then you go, well, why? And what's in that? Where's that coming from? Why are we experiencing the same things? What are we supposed to learn from that? And what can we create with that? Like, what world is that going to make if we listen to that?
Absolutely. And I think, and maybe you can agree with this, is a lot of people already are doing that in such a way where there's, with the internet and stuff, there's that open communication, but also more people going in whether it's joining groups on, other social media sites, and then just having more interactions, willing to hear each other out more, joining different clubs. I mean, I know even before all this COVID stuff, I mean, you see more and more of these different pop-ups of, like instrument stores where you just see people all around. Obviously, biking is a big thing. You just see a bunch of bikers, just more and more people collaborating outside, and you start to see more community based where people are resonating in person, but then they're doing that with people across the world, and then they're doing like, oh, we all go here every year to, to Australia, a bunch of us, and it becomes so much more of this interaction and seeing the importance of community and being close
Yeah.
to people and having that, being within their resonance in their field, because we're feeling each other's that resonance from this far away through screen. Imagine, when you are in person and not letting yourself restrict that connection, like at a concert, right? You feel that it's, even though everyone has a different experience, that energy is literally flowing through everybody, and you're all going like, whoa, I just felt that too. Yeah, no, I felt it over here, and you're all close nearby. So it's a powerful rhythm beat. And
which is why the establishment is trying to keep people apart at the moment. You can't have more than 20 people here or 5 people here or whatever. And it's like, what, you know exactly what they're doing
Oh
because
yeah.
of that.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing too, is you start to, when you start to see people who get that, you start, I see around subtleties where people want to get a little closer. I'll see, even though maybe people are wearing masks and doing their thing, they're surrounded, they're huddled. And in my point of view, I'm like, all right, this clearly, if anyone doesn't see this now, I get it, whatever. But it's like people are already realizing like, I can't be away from people too long. I need that connection. I need it. Some people are like, oh, I'll wear this, I'll do that. But you want people just want to be around each other. And obviously there's others who are way off there who are like, please stay away from me, stay away from me. To those, I wish them well, but you start to see people are wanting to get that resonance back because people don't want to be alone. I've a lot of people you talk to are going, hey man, I just miss human interaction. Like, of all the things, right, that they say we need and what is important in our lives, well, human interaction is not one of them. Don't do that. And people are going, no, but that's what I want. And I think paying attention to that, whether you agree with the narrative or not my place, but pay attention to what you're telling yourself. Hey man, I want to be able to go talk to that person. Or hey, I want to be able to just say hello and smile. Why do I feel, or asking yourself, like, why can't I smile for myself? Like, why do I feel like I'm alone? And not being afraid to just observe it, not necessarily fight it, but observe it and going, well, where did I feel like I connected with people? Oh, listening to music. Is there anywhere around that's doing music on the streets? Or is there a place where people are going to listen to music on a Zoom call? Okay, starting in those different places. Or if you play an instrument or don't, hey, let me start today. Let me try to learn. Those are little things that I think everyone can do. And as you said, it's the power once you start that cycle and that snowball. There's no stopping it. And I just hope more people can connect to that.
Yeah, definitely. And that's like, I'm not a fan of the internet really at all, but I think one great thing about YouTube and that is you can literally go on and be so inspired in a musical sense to see so many people doing, we didn't have it when I was in high school, and it kind of like the level that we thought was attainable was a certain level. But now I'm seeing like 5 and 9-year-olds on guitars doing stuff that we were like, we didn't even know that was possible. So it just kind of like breaks that realm of possibility, just from seeing other people play music and just connecting. Like, I just totally agree with everything you just said. It's just such an important thing, and especially at this time, it's important. And even if you can't play, to listen and to join in and receive that, that unifying kind of energy of the music, and it's really important.
Yeah, and just to kind of wrap things up here, this does all come back to how you perceive sound, light, whatever frequency that's coming in and whatever it is that you're emitting, and understanding that there is purpose to all of that. And it's on us to be cognizant and be an observer of our own being, our living man, our living woman, of self. And when we can do that, and then everyone's doing it together, we're really resonating. And I know we went all over the place, but I feel in many ways we were still trying to stay on that point. So would you agree? I know I took you on a roller coaster.
Yeah,
But
well, I think, I just to summarize, I think, if you look at it in the idea of you've got an individual man or a woman, and then you've got that's a different resonance to how you've got 15 or 20 or then 10,000 or 100,000 at a concert, and then greater into the world. That's the same principle as the one cell having a resonance with other cells. Then the way they resonate together creates the organism of the man or the woman. And so therefore, like having the one organism then in a community, and then the way it interacts into the world, then that's creating the Gaia, or the whole life form of earth, animals, people, and all that sort of stuff. And it's all relevant. That single structure of a cell and the way that resonates based on what's coming in through food, water, air, basically the quality of it, but light, sound, and then your thoughts and how you're actually perceiving and bringing that down into the cells, then that's just it's just such a good correlation between that and then the whole world that we're experiencing. And a lot to think about. Probably not heaps of direct answers for people, but a lot to like really, start mulling over and to get answers for themselves, I guess, as well.
Yeah, and as much as I'm not an interviewer by nature, as much as I can talk to people, this is the kind of true conversation that I love. Is where it's just we're going on what is there and what's coming up. And yes, there's a nice format, and it's nice to see like, all right, this is where the conversation's going. But as we said, it's like that's that 4 count where it's like, all right, this is where the story's going, rather than having this flow, but it's ultimately coming back. That's the way I see it, at least. This is, but dude, I thank you again for your time, and really appreciate everything that you've been doing for the internet and people that are watching. And I know the viewers are loving it too, man. So thank you again for everything. And where can everyone find you again?
Well, my YouTube channel's still up, just my name, and then I've got tombarnett.tv, which is the private side. Today I'm uploading all of those videos to Vimeo. Great. So I can run through the site and not be censored and everything. So that mailing list is open. If anyone wants to jump on there, just put your email in, and then you'll get notifications when the site goes live. And then once I got that up, I'm going to be putting more, not just interviews and live streams, but actual educational content. So how to do certain things specifically, which is different from just sitting and talking at the phone. I'll actually properly put together videos of, just instructionals of a lot of different things that I talk about that can go into a lot greater depth. And so it'll be a good resource for all of that.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you again for your time. And on that, man, we'll see you soon.
Cool. Thanks, Patrick.
Awesome, man. I'll talk to you, man.